It wasn't like I had a manifesto. It was a little fear-based of like, well, we've just made a movie that's gotten great reviews and we're now like indie darlings. Like, we'll erase all of that if we go make a bad studio movie, and that will be on us, and we'll lose everything we've been building so far.
So you were savvy enough to understand that.
Yeah, I kind of was like, this is not just like, I want to have more integrity and be a man. It was also like, you could blow everything here, you know? Because as a filmmaker, like, you make one bad movie and you're kind of out, you know?
The industry is full of people who can describe financing they cannot build. They learn the vocabulary, the sequence, and what competence sounds like when repeated by other people who also cannot build it. So they stop there, and yet nobody told them to stop because nobody had to. The language felt complete enough that the absence of anything behind it was not obvious. The single most expensive gap in independent film right now is between sounding ready and being ready. So now, picture this, and I quote, "What if you could invest in a movie and get your money back, plus a profit, even before the film is released? Then if the movie makes money, it would be the icing on the cake. And if you get a credit on the film, it would be the cherry on top," end quote.
You serious?
The person who wrote that was engaging generally with a real question about how film investment works. The impulse was generous, but what they wrote is a specimen of something that has saturated this industry and that it is incomplete in ways the person writing it cannot see. And it is everywhere. In pitch decks, in panels, in podcasts, in boot camps, in conversations between filmmakers who are reassuring each other with language that feels finished because they all have said it or heard it 50 times. It's all bullshit. Buyers have been openly saying they are being very selective. That matters. In a tighter market, vague finance talk does not become more persuasive. It only gets exposed faster. What this quoted text is loosely gesturing is a pre-sales driven arrangement where contracted minimum guarantees from international distribution deals return investor money before a film ever opens. That arrangement has funded legitimate independent cinema for decades. It describes it the way someone describes a restaurant they went to once, impressionistically and from memory without the address. That is how far the gap actually stretches between that particular comment and that actual investor. No sales agent, no territory breakdown, no MG projections, no waterfall, no discussion of where the investor sits in repayment, what has to be contracted before funds are committed, or what the downside looks like if pre-sales come in at 50% of the projection. No distinction between an estimate and an enforceable obligation. A sales estimate is an opinion. A signed pre-sale agreement is paper. A monetized minimum guarantee is something else again. No delivery risk assessment, no collection mechanics, no completion support, no discussion of lender ability, and no recoupment discipline. And the credit offer at the end is doing the work of a closing argument attached to nothing. Every gap I just named is what the silhouette of a system looks like up close. The icing and cherry framing is the most revealing part. It treats box office and a producing credit as bonuses layered on top of the return. That is correct in principle. Returns should not depend on a theatrical performance, but saying you get your money back before release skips past every difficult part of getting to the place where that sentence is true.
And tell me, what advice would you offer on the present situation?
Pre-sales are driven by package value, by cast, director, genre, market, appetite, territorial demand, or whether a sales company can actually move the rights and whether anybody will lend against the paper once it exists. A signed agreement is still only as useful as the film's ability to get delivered on time, on budget, and in compliance with the terms that trigger payment. The principle is not the plan. And the irony is that the market is telling us even the full version of what I just described is outdated. This keeps happening because bad information does not need to be rigorous to become permanent. It just needs to be familiar. The same loosely sketched frameworks pass between filmmakers and educators and panels and podcasts, with each iteration slightly more confident and slightly less specific than the one before it. By the time it arrives in a public forum, it has been abstracted so far from anything operational that it is just decorative. People hear it enough times and stop asking whether it is precise or executional or whether the person saying it has ever had to carry the consequences of being wrong. Repetition starts standing in for proof. That is borrowed certainty, and it is harder to fix than ignorance because the person holding it has no reason to believe they need fixing. They do not feel like they are guessing. They feel like they are participating in a language community that has already validated what they are saying. They have absorbed compressed secondhand knowledge and carry it with first-rate confidence.
Not a great plan.
That combination destroys more opportunities than not knowing anything, because the person who knows nothing can still recognize they need help. That's like someone who watched 3 YouTube videos on surgery deciding they no longer need a doctor.
It doesn't work that way!
So an HNWI, or high net worth individual, who has spent 10 minutes with a financial advisor in the last year has been exposed to more rigor than what those words contain. These are people who have seen enough underbuilt things to identify one in under 1 minute. When you walk in with an idea, they do not tell you the idea is bad. They simply tell you that it is interesting and they will think about it. Then think about something else entirely. A pitch is researched, individualized, and constructed around a specific investor's motivations, risk tolerance, tax position, timeline, and, well, ego. It lives or dies on how precisely it maps out onto one person's reality. You cannot write a pitch without knowing who you are pitching. If you were a filmmaker and you read what I quoted and thought, yes, that is how I'm going to approach investors.
Man, you are one pathetic loser.
You are not ready to raise. Going into it anyway will not make you more ready. It will make the next version of you more apologetic and less confident, which is the opposite of what you need. The gap that is costing filmmakers the opportunities they have worked years to get is the confusion between understanding how something works and having a working version of it. You can understand pre-sales conceptually and still have nothing to show an investor. Conceptual understanding has never closed a deal. What closes contracted commitments, enforceable obligations, and documentation that a financial advisor would not throw away. So now, what is the point of all of this? Well, what travels through a panel or a podcast is the vocabulary of financing, never the ability behind it. Because an ability is not the kind of thing that copies through speech. So the education layer of this industry keeps reproducing one part of the financing that is not financing. It does that regardless of who runs it or how honest they are. The familiar version that gets passed around is not a worn down copy of a working one. It was never going to be anything else because a working one cannot make the trip. So here are the lessons. In 2002, researchers at Yale ran 12 experiments on how well people understand everyday objects. Toilets, zippers, sewing machines. They asked participants to rate their own understanding on a 7-point scale, and, you guessed it, their ratings were high. Then they asked those same people to write out, step by step, how the project actually works. After the written explanation, self-rated understanding collapsed. The researchers called it the illusion of explanatory depth. People believed they understood how things worked until they had to trace the mechanism on paper. The finding was narrow, and that is what makes it useful. The illusion only showed up in one type of knowledge: explanatory knowledge, how things work casually. It did not show up for facts. It did not show up for procedures. It did not show up for narratives. People were not overconfident about what they knew. They were overconfident about how well they could explain the process behind what they knew. In 2013, a researcher at the University of Colorado named Philip Fernbach ran that same framework against political policy. He asked people to explain how cap and trade works, how single-payer healthcare works, step by step. After attempting the mechanistic explanation, 2 things happened. Their self-assessed understanding dropped, and the extremity of their position dropped with it. They got more moderate. Fernbach ran a control condition. Instead of asking people how to explain how the policy works, he asked them to list their reasons for supporting it. When people listed reasons, nothing changed. Confidence held, extremity held, position held. Reasons draw on values, on hearsay, social signals, and general principles. None of that requires you to know how the thing actually works. Only the mechanistic walkthrough, the step-by-step written explanation of what causes what, exposed the gap. A joint study between DocSend and Harvard Business School tracked how long investors actually spend reviewing a pitch deck. In 2023, the average for a seed stage deck was 1 minute and 56 seconds. That number has been falling year over year. A typical VC analyst reviews roughly 3,000 decks per year and funds about 9 of them. That is venture. That is the friendly version of this. Independent film has no standardized pitch format, no shared evaluation framework, and no institutional reason for the person across the table from you to give you a second minute of the first one that did not land. All of that is the difference between a random comment on my social media and institutional investment. The quoted text is reasons. Pre-sales are a good idea. Returns should not depend on theatrical. Investors should get their money back before release. Those are all correct positions, and listing them does not collapse the illusion, it only protects it. The test is the mechanism. Who signs what? In what order? What triggers what payment? What happens when step 4 fails? What happens when the sales agent cannot move through Southeast Asia? What happens when the completion guarantor flags the budget? And what happens when the MG is signed but the lender will not advance against it? Those questions separate someone who understands film financing from someone who has been told about it. And the window for proving you can answer it is shrinking. That is why in 2026 and beyond, you build for yourself. The old paths were drawn for a buyer base that was active a decade ago and has since contracted to a fraction of what it was. Again, that is why real self-assessment usually requires an outside party. That is the work at Wrap Consulting. What is your risk-adjusted project profile? Everything you have been sold about this process was to keep you chasing access, validation, and hope. It was never built to tell you the truth. Return that shit to sender. If you like this video, thank you for watching. I invite you to please like, share, and subscribe. I will see you next time.